Let me start off with just saying I'm not officially becoming a monk. What I'm doing is moving into a meditation center. It's called the Monastic Academy for the Preservation of Life on Earth. The acronym is MAPLE, which I think is pretty cute. I like the acronym. But I'm not technically, going off to Tibet or India, becoming a full-fledged monk or anything like that. But what I am doing is joining a community of like-minded individuals with the primary intention of deepening my meditation practice and surrounding myself with a group of people whose aim is to spiritually awaken. So even though it's not technically a full-fledged monkhood type of endeavor, I am joining a pretty rigorous and renunciate type of community. What it entails is waking up at around 4:45 a.m., doing practices of various kinds. There's going to be chanting, meditation, until around 7:30. I go about my day from there. I can continue doing my work remotely. And then in the evening, there's more meditation and chanting that we will do. It'll probably be around 3 to 3.5 hours of formal practice per day. And then once a month, there's going to be some kind of meditation retreat or retreat with the intention of, cultivating wisdom, consciousness, these sorts of fun things. Why am I doing this? And why am I proposing in the title that you should embrace monk mode as well? Well, let me just elaborate on that by saying we are living in extremely interesting times in human history, but interesting in a pretty pessimistic way, in my opinion. The climate is being systematically decimated by human activity, so climate change and the results of climate change, man-made climate change, are already happening. So this includes things like our ice caps melting, our rainforests being destroyed. We're going through a mass extinction event. We are destroying our soils, so our food supply. We're taking advantage of all kinds of biodiversity, killing off all kinds of biodiversity. We're poisoning our oceans. We're overfishing on our oceans. So this is going to have massive ramifications in the next 100 years. And from what I've been able to observe just following the news and keeping up to date with these sorts of things, humanity's not slowing down to the extent that we need to in order to prevent catastrophe. Now, you couple this extremely aggressive destruction of our environment and the subsequent changes that are a result of that environmental collapse with existentially threatening technologies such as artificial intelligence and the ways in which artificial intelligence is going to completely reform and reshape our economic structures. One of the most common ways that we hear about in the news about how artificial intelligence is going to change our economy is through self-driving cars. So all of the people that are employed through Uber or people that drive semis on the highways, etc., this type of job force is going to be completely wiped out with artificial intelligence self-driving cars. But it doesn't just stop there. There are also artificial intelligence that are potentially going to replace other professions, such as engineers, physicians, and doctors. Artificial intelligence that is able to diagnose or perform surgeries better than trained physicians. You've also got artificial intelligence that is better at financial planning and analysis. So finance teams in corporate Western society are going to be replaced by artificial intelligence, AI that can analyze data and budget data more effectively than the human mind is capable of doing, just because it can handle more bits of information. It has a higher intelligence than what the typical or average human mind is capable of. So you've got artificial intelligence on the horizon that is going to really radically transform the way that our economic systems and job force exists in the 21st century. But you've also got other technologies such as gene editing. So what happens when we start having class divides of citizens who are able to afford genetic augmentation or genetically program fetuses before, even conception potentially, like you have a class of citizens that are genetically modified and a class of citizens that are just normal. What kind of social ramifications is that going to create? It's going to create a deeper divide between the rich and the poor. And on this topic of wealth inequality, that is another problem that is really coming to a crescendo in the 21st century, which is this massive wealth inequality that exists globally. So if you're watching this video, you are probably living in a Western society of some kind, whether in the United States, Europe, Canada, these types of countries. The issue, though, is that if we look at the collective 7.5 billion of us on the planet that are living, the amount of wealth inequality is astronomical. It's quite frankly disgusting if you look at it at a global level. This type of economic disparity cannot exist. It cannot hold itself up long term. And even though it is sustainable somewhat in the short term, eventually there will reach an inflection point where the whole system basically implodes because the base, the global population that's supposed to be supporting these uber rich billionaires, simply can't afford to continue the way that things are. So you've got this massive economic implosion looming on the horizon, the potential for it on the horizon because of this massive wealth inequality. And that's another problem that we are coming to a head in the 21st century. You've also got other technologies like drones, artificially intelligent drones. And if you look at just how easily weaponized drones are, it could be a serious problem in the future. Unlike nuclear weapons, which are very difficult to create and, yes, destructive and very powerful, it's not easy for small groups of malicious people with malicious intent to create. It's difficult, for example, a terrorist organization to create nuclear weapons. It requires a lot of engineering, it requires a lot of resources, it requires a lot of just planning and strategy, and it is also very destructive and you have to be careful when creating them. Whereas with drones, the way that the technology is moving, this type of technology is a lot easier to create if you are just a ragtag team of individuals. And so when you have this type of potential for drones, which if you look into it, we can program them to pinpoint and target specific groups. So the possibility of some kind of ethnic cleansing event from drone technology, it's there. The possibility is there. If you look at that, that's also a problem. New types of drone warfare that humanity is going to have to face. Other issues include even bioweapons. So there's a conspiracy theory that the coronavirus, the pandemic, was created from some kind of engineering, some sort of bioengineering, that we artificially created the coronavirus. And perhaps that's true, perhaps it's not. But what I can say is that if you look into the research, there are potentially more powerful ways to create a deadly virus than how coronavirus is spreading and how virulent it is, as well as how deadly it is. If you take the virulence and jack it up, because we can genetically modify viruses, and you take basically the mortality rate of a virus and jack that up because we understand the genetic code that creates these types of mortalities, you can engineer some really atrocious, awful, widespreading viruses. And so if one of those gets out, what happens? And the thing about the bioweapons is that you can bet on the fact that all major world powers are researching this type of technology. It's sort of like the nuclear arm race, where when one country is building up nuclear weapons, really the only defense is for everyone to start building up nuclear weapons. So there's this sort of defense from mutually assured destruction going on. And there are probably other existential threats that I'm not even mentioning. So why am I saying all this, and what the hell does this have to do with me going off and living in a monastic setting? Well, I personally don't have the answer to these types of threats that humanity is not only going to face in the coming century, but are already facing right now. I don't have the answer for what humanity is supposed to do, other than to say that I have an intuitive confidence that if humanity were to adopt contemplative practice, meditation basically, that would give us the answers to these challenges. We don't lack power. We don't lack technology as a civilization or as a collective. I mean, yes, there are going to be magical new technologies that are going to be invented in the next 500 years, let's say 1,000 years, assuming we don't all go extinct. I have no doubt that there are going to be massive technological advancements, potentially, even the possibility of creating virtual realities that are just as realistic as the real world. I mean, there's some crazy technology being developed, and I have no doubt that it's not going to slow down anytime soon. But what we lack is not this technology. We don't lack the technology needed to solve many of these problems, to elevate the collective well-being of the majority of the human population. Like, we have the technology to do that right now. We have the technology to feed the majority of the human population. We have the technology to house the majority of the human population, to provide vaccines and food, shelter, water, necessities, survival necessities to the overwhelming majority of the human population. But what we lack is wisdom and compassion. So if you look at the way that we treat our fellow man as a collective, not any one individual in particular, but just as a collective, we are in an incredibly selfish species. We are an incredibly destructive species. The pace of our technological advancement has, in a sense, exponentially outpaced our internal development as a species, our psychological development, the wisdom by which we approach this existence, what it means to be alive at all. And so for me, the reason that I am deciding to go monk mode, and why I think you should as well, is because, again, we are at an inflection point with the human project, the story of humanity. There will most likely be very turbulent times ahead. And if we think about what the worst case scenario is, if all of these issues were to somehow culminate and facilitate some sort of wide-scale collapse, the question then arises, do I have the internal mechanisms, do I have the psychological development, do I have the spiritual development to face an enormous amount of pain and grief? Do I have the spiritual development to be at peace with the world falling apart? Do I have the spiritual development to look death in the eyes and be okay, to smile even? And right now, I do not. I do not have the capacity within me to face this type of possible pain and possible suffering that is right around the corner. Like, the potential is just right there. I don't have it within myself to face that. And so I view this as an opportunity to train and prepare for the future. And not prepare in some sort of conspiracy theorist, oh my God, the world is going to end, I have to go create some sort of bunker and stash up on food and guns and prepare for the end of times. It's not like that. I'm not looking to be a conspiracy theorist, but I'm looking to prepare for this possible future that I speak of. Now, that all being said, we need to keep a couple of things in mind. One, you don't have to actually go off to some sort of community or monastic setting to go monk mode, as I'm defining it in this video. You can very rigorously deepen your spiritual practice on your own by meditating a lot, going on retreats, joining local meditation groups and communities, finding a teacher, whether that teacher is locally or even online. There's a lot of online meditation teachers that I'm sure would be more than happy to provide their services for you. You don't actually have to join, like I said, a monastic setting like I am to start seriously preparing oneself spiritually. We also need to keep in mind that there needs to be some kind of level of optimism when we start really sitting with all of these possible worst case scenarios. So if all that we're doing is ruminating and freaking out internally about all of the potential catastrophes that are around the corner, that's not very effective or helpful for ourselves or our communities. So I would actually say that we need optimism. We need some kind of optimism. We need to have a vision of a bright future. And even if things do get bad, like let's say climate change really starts disrupting the economy, displacing large amounts of people, supply chains start going down, food supplies stop being delivered, and we have to basically collectively live in a much more Spartan or sparse environment. A lot of times with the way that things grow and develop, there is a tearing down so that there can be a rebuilding of something more beautiful. A very easy example to think about is building muscle. When we're in the gym building muscle, we're literally tearing our muscles apart so that the fibers can then regrow and build up a stronger, more aesthetic body. In a sense, this is how growth happens, even with meditation. So if on a collective scale we have to go through some type of degradation and destruction period so that we can then become a more beautiful species, that may be part of the equation for the future of humanity. But we have to be able to embrace the pain, the growth, with equanimity while having a vision of something more beautiful. So make sure that you have some level of optimism, some level of possibility in your mind. My personal vision is that if we were to collectively learn how to be happy and to be satisfied with nothing but our own being, or nothing but our own true nature, this would have massive ramifications for the development of humanity moving forward. And I think that, there are instances in nature where there is exponential growth, like rapid transformation and reorientation. So even though right now, in the current state of the human population, there has just been this steady decline and falling apart of our collective systems, that doesn't necessarily mean we can't turn it around very quickly. Really, rapidly improve our state. I don't know how this would occur. I don't know if this would occur, but I do hold it as a possibility because of, studying nature, studying systems that do have this exponential takeoff. One of those systems is meditation progress, by the way. You can check out some of my other videos on that. But the last thing that I would just like to communicate and to encourage everyone that's watching this to keep in mind is that we are all going to have to face death, and we are all going to have to face pain in our lives. Death and pain are just part of the experience of being alive. That's part of survival. That's part of life. And if you look at the human mind, fear of pain and fear of death are really the two fundamental sources of suffering in our experience. Our aversion to pain, our aversion to annihilation. So on some level, the spiritual path and what meditation is ultimately preparing us for is the ability to face these things with courage, sovereignty, equanimity. So regardless of whether humanity is on a crash course for calamity or whether I am way overhyping the possible dangers that we are, facing, on some level, pain and death are waiting for us. In Buddhism, there are these three things that they always talk about us having to face, which is aging, illness, and death. So the aging process oftentimes is accompanied with a lot of pain, just in the body and even in the mind. Illness, we're always going to be getting sick. Our health is going to, on some level, fail, and then ultimately, we will die. And part of our biological programming ingrains a fear of that annihilation. So regardless of the state of humanity, we do have to face these things head on. So part of going monk mode, so to speak, is really getting serious about our own well-being, our own peace, our capacity to face these things. And as strange and magical as it is, when we start taking responsibility for our own suffering and we start taking responsibility for these things, such as pain, death, or even illness, potential collapse of humanity in the future, it creates a nourishment and a space inside of our minds to start solving serious problems in our environment, in our own lives. And that has a rippling effect in our personal communities. And if enough people started taking responsibility for their suffering and taking responsibility for their happiness and well-being and peace, there would be a massive cascading effect overall. And that's my particular vision, bias, and something that I have faith in, which is strange. I'm not normally a faithy type of guy, but I do have faith that that would happen. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any thoughts, questions, or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. The last thing that I want to mention for a lot of my subscribers or people that are new to my channel is just that because I'll be joining this community and because it's going to be quite intense, I'm basically going to be meditating and working, and that's all that I'll be doing. I am sacrificing a lot of free time. Videos may be slower, and I know they're already kind of slow. I've been releasing once every 2 weeks, but just because of the focus of what I'm doing and where I'm going, video content may be a little bit slower. But that being said, my plan is to eventually exit this environment and increase my production. So part of why I'm going is to become a better teacher, so to speak, of meditation, to make sure that if I'm going to sit up and get in front of a camera and start speaking about really deep topics like meditation, I know what the fuck I'm talking about, rather than just basically being deceptive, deceiving the viewers and myself as some sort of authority figure. I want to make sure that I have a grounded embodiment of these topics and this practice. So just, I would ask, be patient, but more content and helpful videos are coming in the future. Thank you everyone for your support thus far. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the views, I appreciate the comments, the likes, all of it. So I hope these videos are helpful, and I look forward to making more in the future. So until next time.